All right, the future of work, 2040. What is it going to look like? After seeing Ava, I've completely changed my talk. In 2040, everyone in this room is going to have an Ava. I'm obsessed. I totally have a crush on Ava, but I'll take that up with her upstairs at the rooftop. So when we think about 2040, it's really hard to prognose what our landscape, not to mention the workplace, is going to be like at that time. Is anyone here in the room familiar with Jay Forrester? Since we're in MIT territory, his name might be familiar. He's from MIT, and he created a program called World One. And World One predicted that in 1940, that was the peak of our global civilization. And by 2040, his program said that civilization would collapse. That is a pretty grim, apocalyptic picture of 2040. That is not what we're here to talk about today. I am a very optimistic person, and I reckon most people here in the room probably feel the same way. But I want you to take a moment and think about what are your hopes and what are your fears when you consider life in 2040. And just think about that for a second. I do a lot of design thinking workshops. My background is in design and user experience. And I will say and challenge us all to think about ourselves as the authors of the future. We have the agency to create the 2040 that we want to live in. And I want everyone in this room to be empowered and take with you individually and take back to your teams the lessons that you've learned and create a landscape, a work environment, a family environment, and it's all intermixed, that you want to live in. We can control that to a large extent. So as we get into this, I'm going to talk about 3 points. But first, I wanted to ask everyone if you would consider yourself a lifelong learner. Raise your hand if you do. That is good. I would expect that of this group. I think it is critical if you don't remember anything else from what I say, because I know I'm between you and cocktails right now, that every employee is a student. Every employee is a student, and every employee should be a student. If you're interviewing for a new role, you should be asking that company how they're supportive of you when it comes to learning and knowledge, advancing your education and skills. That's critical. And if you're interviewing a candidate to come onto your team, you should find out what they're doing as far as their education, and not just executive education from Harvard or MIT. It could be taking courses on Khan Academy or Coursera or anything. People should be in a perpetual learning mode. At IBM, we actually have a policy that's called Think 40. Every employee is required to do 40 hours of education a year. I actually think that should be changed to 40 hours of education per quarter, because the rate and velocity of change that we're seeing right now really requires that. And it isn't something that people should be afraid of or ashamed of, that I don't have the skills. It's just so much is changing and coming at us so quickly. That is what is required for us to maintain a competitive advantage. So if you are a lifelong learner, and if you are an insatiably curious person, this is really a great time to be alive. So as we look at 4 truths about today's work landscape, I wanted to sort of frame this entire presentation around the first fact being just the digital disruption that we're living in right now. And in the digital age, everybody has at least one, if not multiple, phones, tablets, whatever device you use, in your pocket, maybe in your bed, at all times. And that's the way that we live. And when it comes to experience, the last best experience you have anywhere becomes the minimum expectation of what you require from your work and from any interaction you have. So customer experience even impacts your expectations of your employer and the company that you're in. With demographics, millennials already make up half of the workforce. Yesterday, I flew here from Amsterdam. I was working with a company there. One of their biggest concerns was their aging workforce. They were concerned about that not because they had a bunch of institutional knowledge retiring. They said their aging workforce was very reluctant to change, and they were having trouble adopting new ways of working. And they were caught in this perpetual cycle of just making POCs, and nothing was getting deployed, and nothing was getting adopted. And that was a real problem that was holding the company back. So I think everyone is sort of facing this challenge of demographics right now within their companies. So that's a big part of what we're seeing. And then the new sort of social contract of the employer-employee relationship. Employees want to feel a great sense of purpose, but also have flexibility, and on top of that, some career trajectory or career path. And that is something that I feel like IBM does quite well. And when I look back, before I joined IBM, I owned my own company, and we unfortunately did not have a clear career path for our designers. We would sort of wait until somebody seemed like restless and about to quit, and then we would all of a sudden figure out a career path for them, and that was absolutely terrible. So I think I've learned a lot of great lessons working in a large organization, such as the value of building that trust, which other speakers have talked about today, and being true to that social contract. So as the world of work changes, employee expectations evolve. Similarly, as this world changes, organizations must become cognitive to the core. Now, when I talk about being cognitive, I am talking about companies becoming more intelligent. And with intelligence, I promised that this would not be an ad for IBM Watson, so I'm going to talk about AI in a fairly agnostic sense. But I think that as we approach the coming decades, we need to consider how we integrate AI into our daily work. And it appears in ways that you sometimes don't even detect. Because when we look at changing culture, especially if you're in a large enterprise, you cannot change culture one colleague at a time. You can't get mass adoption or mass deployment done that way. But people have an expectation that you'll know them and understand them and be able to anticipate their needs and be able to engage with them. So with AI, we can learn, we can represent knowledge, reason, and interact. So that is why this is such a powerful mechanism to be able to deploy change at scale. It's not just talking about technology for technology's sake. It's really unleashing the potential of a cognitive enterprise. So that's taking an organization, and this is sort of a representation of an HR organization, and being able to take all of the data that you're collecting about what's happening with your employees through employee surveys, through all of the educational modules you may have, and having that single source of data or single source of truth that can be shared across the company. Another big piece that I've learned over the past few years working with external clients on this topic is around change management. And people can't absorb this avalanche of change too quickly. So you have to break it into packets and really look at things one quarter at a time as far as how you can make teams, cross-functional teams, feel comfortable to really adopt and absorb these new ways of working that you might be introducing into your company. So some of the changes we've seen already, I think instead of using the term CHRO, we might start thinking of a Chief People Success Officer. And again, I really enjoyed the talk on empathy because it is really, really critical to understand the emotions and the motivations of your people. And the shift to cloud is allowing organizations, especially global ones, to share and access information much more easily, as well as the ability to deliver very personalized, one-on-one training and education that's designed at an individual level. And we've also talked about the use of voice and voice UI as an interface to be able to answer questions or share institutional knowledge across the organization. And blockchain as well is good, not only for having that shared ledger, single source of truth when it comes to information, but I think very, very soon we're going to be seeing crypto payments as well. And that's something that once it's unleashed is going to become, I believe, very pervasive, especially on a global scale. And AI and blockchain can also provide meaningful purpose when it comes to the traceability of products and services and knowing where the origin of your products came from. And having IoT involved and sensors, all of this can be shown and reported in real time. And many of the corporations you work for have, as IBM has, a great commitment now, especially since I've joined, I've seen this transition to having a real focus on health and wellness. So I think these are some of the changes that are already in the works that are sort of table stakes for having a successful company when it comes to people. So this is where we are now. How do we get to the future? And that is where it's all about skills. This is a very primitive looking robot compared to Ava, but it's like the retro version of Ava. So we have created personalized learning, a platform that we try to aspire to be like Netflix, meaning we have an algorithm that gets to know you, where you are in your career journey, what your aspirations are within and beyond the company, so you can get served up the right learning for you. And this is something that's proven to be very effective. And it's something that for IBM is something that's been homegrown. But if your organization doesn't have the capacity for that investment, there are plenty of external sources to create similar education modules, platforms for your employees. And you probably heard and talked to some of them today. But I think that is critical, as well as developing a new mindset for managers to really work hard to engage with their people and encourage their teams to manage up and really grow that sense of transparency that goes beyond, what we used to hear of a few years ago, having just an open door policy. Another challenge I see is people unlocking all of the information that sits in their organizations. So the cloud is great, but the cloud sort of allows us to have this infinite storage capacity. So many organizations, 80% of their content is out there and people don't know how to access it, and it isn't really organized in any way. So there's, beyond IBM solutions like Lucy from a company called Equals3 that can digitize and apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to all of the PDFs and documents that you have that you give it access to. So it can organize it and help you make it useful. And 75% of employees want this one-to-one personalization that they're quite frankly not seeing today. So these are some of the areas of growth or areas of improvement that you should be thinking about. And ultimately, some simple things to introduce beyond the personalized learning experience are virtual tutors, career coaches, and cognitive career counselors. All of this can give people an opportunity to take 24/7 engagement whenever they'd like, because most people from 9 to 5, they're just keeping up with the emails and the daily workloads. I usually tap into sources like this or catch up on learning at 10 o'clock when my family's gone to sleep and I have some time again. So it is really important to understand that people need to be able to access these tools and materials in their own time. Yep. It is sort of like a career coach, if you will, but it's powered by Watson, in our case for IBM. So as we have thought about IBM's HR transformation, it's important that you, for your company, agree on principles and the Northstar of what you're aspiring to be. And there are certain new ways of working, like design thinking and agile, that are very important, I think, to having a successful mission here, as well as the ability to benchmark. So IBM benchmarks itself, its digital experience, its HR experience, its operational efficiency, and you can look at that quarter by quarter. So you can do sort of the process accounting on, are we getting better at these things? And creating an environment and redefining your KPIs. So when you think about incubating and scaling, that you are actually driving adoption and you're not creating tools for tool's sake, that you have proof points that people are actually using the tools. And we also, as a company, are obsessed with analytics, as well as automation. And when it comes to work and co-location, some of you may have seen the article that came out in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. When Michelle Peluso joined our organization as CMO, she called the entire marketing organization back to work and said, you have to be in the office, no more working remote distributed teams. That's not how I do things here. And there was a huge backlash when it came to that statement, which I think has now become more flexible. My team is largely distributed, and even more so this year. So I think that flexibility in location is really, really important. And using technology like Ava, and I basically joke that I keep my Zoom channel open all the time so people can pop up and pop in and check in. That's really, really important as far as creating this vision and driving trust. So before I even joined IBM, IBM invested $123 million in its HR transformation. And that's a lot of money. According to our CHRO, that yielded $239 million in ROI, which is pretty phenomenal. And a big part of that came from IBM Watson for retention. So Watson can now look for clues within individual behaviors and what people are doing online, and they can tell if you're looking for another job. And then IBM can proactively take the action to retain you. So that in and of itself has saved the company a lot of money. And these are some of the other things that then transitions into avoiding the clash and how we deal with the fact that we have now a huge millennial workforce, as well as some legacy people. And of course, within IBM, it was the first company that I ever worked in my career, where there's literally people who have been there for 35 years, for 40 years. And I came from sort of the design boutique world and the startup world, and I never heard of people staying in companies, for 40 years, but that's absolutely the case in IBM. So how do you avoid having that culture clash? These are some of the ways, as well as organizational principles, that will have helped us tremendously, going from a hierarchy to a more distributed, decentralized, and democratic way of working. The first year that I was with IBM, I brought some clients in, and I work in New York City in Astor Place. It was an automotive company, and they were about to sign a contract with IBM, and I could tell that they had some reluctance. I brought them into Astor Place, and they saw this studio where literally every wall is a whiteboard, and modular and agile teams and the new ways of working that we've adopted. And they completely changed their mind. They were like, wow, we had no idea that you work this way. And a week later, they signed the contract, and I got this really glowing email from my boss at the time, and I was like, I just took them for a walk around the 4th floor. What are you talking about? But part of it was showing that we walk the walk. And we work in this way with just great teams and for us as well, great leadership. So our CEO, Jenny Rometty, is a great believer in the importance of employee engagement. And we just had surveys go out actually last week to our teams, and as managers at IBM, those survey results are critically important. So I think creating that engagement and making sure that through surveys or some other mechanism, you're enabling feedback at all times, as well as thinking about what social principles are important to you. Of course, giving people an environment where they can fail and creating a place where people's passion for the work that they do can really shine through. The new ways of working as well can also enable us to create new partnerships. So IBM, of course, has had some pretty incredible new acquisitions, including the acquisition recently of Red Hat. But we have so many ecosystem partners, and as we've now changed our strategy slightly when it comes to cloud, all of the people who used to be our enemies, the Googles, the Microsofts, the AWSs of the world, are now coming to the table with us. So having also a business platform and ways of working that allow for that collaboration is also really essential. And being able to have, and I didn't talk about this too much, a way to make sense of your data, including employee data, so you can build predictive models over time. So with this new leadership paradigm, it is very important to let people feel like they're architecting the choices, or as when I started talking about 2040, the fact that we in this room are the ones that are going to architect what the world looks like. And the world right now is not so binary, it's not so black and white. You can rely on data and demand data-driven decision-making and still trust your intuition at the end of the day. You can be skeptical and ask questions and ask why, while still being open-minded. So these are the new management and leadership principles that will get us to what I call the new normal, to having this experience-centric, self-disruptive experience that will carry us to the vision of 2024. So back to the term I used earlier, the cognitive enterprise. This diagram is basically a view of our HR landscape at IBM. And IBM Watson is woven into literally every single one of these touch points. And it's completely transformed the way we work. And now we're taking this to our clients who are interested and saying, how can we help you do the same thing? Then you did hear earlier, I know, some talk about chatbots. We have an entire chatbot ecosystem and chatbot strategy that surrounds all of this as well, which is also very important and very useful when it comes to being and working in a global company. So the future vision for the HR organization, of course, starts with the person and is built using digitally native tools like the cloud, AI, blockchain, and in a moment, I'll show you a video of how we're integrating IoT and sensors in a dynamic way in the workforce and the work environment. All of this is brought to life in our solution centers. And as I said, we have so many strategic partners that we need to bring into the fold as well. And ultimately, we can take this data to drive decisions when it comes to workforce planning and when it comes to skills strategy on what we need to buy, what we need to build, and what we need to borrow as far as freelance or contingent workers. So I'll share with you now a video that is an sort of explanation for people that may be in more of a manufacturing and supply chain space of what the future of work looks like today that can give you a sense of how IoT can really be a game changer. So back to 2040. That's what we're doing today. So imagine again, what is the world going to look like in 2040? Andrew Winston published a really interesting piece last month in the Sloan Review, and he talked about a few of his predictions for 2030. And they weren't just predictions, they were actually data points that we can all reflect on what that means to us and our businesses. In 2030, there'll be 1 billion additional people in the world, which is going to have radical implications. And by that time, we all know about the surge in urbanization that's going on. 2/3 of the population will be living in cities. So as a business, we can't all afford to buy really expensive real estate in cities. That goes back to the point that we need to adapt to a distributed workforce and think about what the implications are to that, as well as transparency. And on the transparency point, this video is a really good demonstration of the fact that by putting a sensor on your body and letting your employer see what's happening, whether you're tired, whether you might be hungover, whatever is happening with you that day, they're going to know that. So the whole notion of transparency in the workplace is going to completely change even further by 2020, or 2040 rather. So it's really, really interesting to see where all of this will go. And a lot of people, of course, for Ray Kurzweil fans out there, are thinking about singularity and what happens when AI and robots become as intelligent as humans. There's still a lot of debate as to when this is going to happen. I think Ray's latest prediction is in 2045. And the CEO of SoftBank actually now says he predicts singularity will happen in 2047. So that is something that for some people, like Elon Musk, might keep you up at night. But I again go back to the point that it's up to us to govern and be responsible stewards of our technology and how we use it and how we interact with it and what it means to our work life. I fundamentally believe in this image right here that the future of computing and the future of human workers are tied together and will be tied together in 2040 and beyond for the rest of our lives. That it is just integrated, and that is the world that we live in. That is the world that we will continue to see, but it is ours to control. It is ours to author. So I'm happy I'm out of time, but I'm happy to continue the conversation upstairs. I'll be sticking around for the cocktail hour. And don't hesitate to reach out anytime if you have any questions or want to talk about this further. Thank you very much.